Big day south of the border for President Donald Trump and the Republican Party as they hold their national convention this week. Much of it, of course, online because of the pandemic. One of the speakers on the first night, Nikki Haley, former ambassador to the United Nations, former governor of South Carolina. Haley, whose parents are originally from India, defending President Trump in her speech and attacking the Democrats.
In much of the Democratic Party, it's now fashionable to say that America is racist. That is a lie. America is not a racist country.
Haley says Trump has always put the American people first, something Joe Biden won't do. She's also long been seen as a possible future presidential contender for the Republican Party. Meantime, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate, shared much the same sentiment about Trump and racism in the states. Listen to this.
Joe Biden said if a black man didn't vote for him, he wasn't truly black. Joe Biden said black people are a monolithic community. It was Joe Biden who said poor kids can be just as smart as white kids. In 1994, Biden led the charge on a crime bill that put millions of black Americans behind bars. President Trump's criminal justice reform law fixed many of the disparities Biden created and made our system more fair and just for all Americans.
All right, lots to unpack. Let's bring in CTV's Tom Walters, who's standing by in Los Angeles. So, Tom, what's the strategy here? You hear from Nikki Haley and you hear from Tim Scott. What's going on?
Well, the message here is that the party is not racist, that the president is not racist. There is this aura that has surrounded the Trump administration really from the very beginning of Donald Trump's candidacy. That was clearly what they were trying to, and this is starting to cost him badly with the support of particularly suburban white women. But just as you have Tim Scott, who I thought was really very effective in making the point, offering really quite an optimistic vision of the country and making a pretty good case for the idea that the Republicans, in their own way, are also a welcoming and diverse party. Talking about economic opportunity and sort of the evolution of the Southern heart. Optimistic stuff. Nikki Haley, who could be very much a powerful image and symbol for the party of its diversity, had to soft pedal her own credentials in that area because as governor of South Carolina, she took the Confederate flag off the state capitol. In discussing that last night, she only referred to it as just a divisive symbol, a divisive monument to the past. She never mentioned that it was the Confederate flag because you have Donald Trump Jr. and the president himself all in on the preservation of Confederate monuments. So here you have somebody essentially denying racism while being very careful not to step on the toes of racists.
Absolutely. Can I also ask you about the very intense speech by Kimberly Guilfoyle, who is the girlfriend of Donald Trump Jr., and, what you made of her performance?
Well, intense is certainly one way of describing it. I mean, it seemed, that it has been widely mocked today for the sort of ferocity of it. This is a speech that, in terms of the style of the presentation, has all of the, the hallmarks of 30s Europe or a Disney cartoon villain. I think the Daily Beast summed it up by saying their headline was "Kimberly Guilfoyle shouts unhinged RNC speech at the top of her lungs." And there are people doing the same thing, using part of her script today on the, on the internet and posting the results in a kind of Kimberly Guilfoyle challenge. But apart from style, there are some real issues of substance. She painted California as this kind of dystopian nightmare that she's holding up as the example of what happens when liberal Democrats run amok. And, painted a picture of California that made you think that Blade Runner was a documentary. And she also described herself as a first-generation American, calling her mother an immigrant. Her mother's from Puerto Rico.
Which is, of course, a U.S. territory. Can I ask you about...
Yes, and she's a U.S. citizen.
About tonight now.
But this dovetails sort of into, not to belabor the point, but this dovetails into a sort of a seeming reluctance in the past on the part of the administration to actually recognize that Puerto Rico is an American territory and Puerto Ricans are American citizens.
Yeah.
So it had echoes of that.
Okay, how about night two now, coming up tonight? Who are we going to hear from, and what are you going to be watching for, Tom?
Well, I think a couple of things are going to be noteworthy, and there are a lot of speakers tonight. The Trump family will be well represented. We'll hear from Eric Trump. We'll hear from Tiffany Trump. And the night will be capped by a speech by the First Lady. Now, of course, this is really the biggest public event that Melania Trump will have addressed since the 2016 convention, when her speech was ended up being an embarrassment to her because it cribbed heavily from a speech that Michelle Obama had given, and she was called out and certainly seemed to have been blindsided by the fact that the script for her speech included plagiarized material. The other thing that's going to be interesting to watch for tonight is Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, who is expected to address the convention from the backdrop of Jerusalem. Unusual for a Secretary of State to get that overtly political, especially from a foreign location.
Tom Walters in Los Angeles following it all for us. Good to talk to you, Tom. Great analysis, as always.
Thanks, Todd.